Hello, my name is Tara Brabazon and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 163, Translocalism, with or without the hyphen. Now, this vlog continues our single word vlog series. Trust me, they're ending really soon, I promise. And it's interesting, when I started this, I didn't know where we go. And through your suggestions, these single words have moved into two particular areas. Firstly, managing some quite deep emotional issues for PhD students. That's been one arm of what we've been doing in the last little bit. But the second area that's been really interesting, high S, we got what we wanted S, is that high theory work. So we've had this deep emotional stuff and also this high theory, which I've absolutely adored. So what a weird and wonderful combination. So this one, we enter the theory zone once more. And I need to do this one with a second vlog to follow once we're out of this single word series, because I got a very powerful request from a student who's just about to graduate from North America, indeed the United States. And this soon-to-be graduated PhD student contacted me with a major worry, concern, query. It was quite a long email, and he wanted to remain anonymous, and you'll see why in a second. So he said to me, look, I am an American, I have an American PhD, but I would like to work outside of the United States. Indeed, I would like to work in Australia or New Zealand. But his supervisor, or should I say in the North American system, his advisor, said to him, oh no, you have to have a PhD in the country in which you are working. And this young man contacted me because obviously I have an Australian PhD and I've worked around the world. And my late husband had a PhD from the United Kingdom and worked around the world. So, clearly, this supervisor, nay advisor, is completely wrong. That is wrong, 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 wrong. Which part of wrong don't you understand? Okay, so in fact, holding a PhD from another country other than the one in which you are working is a profound advantage. Trust me, I shortlist and I interview for jobs all the time. And I love it when I see that international movement, that international expertise. It's terrific. It's an advantage. The last thing that any nation needs and any national university needs is a bunch of people who have all been trained in the same way. Can you imagine? Because then you're not questioning the assumptions of that training. You just all have done the same stuff. You all agree on the same stuff. It's all experiential. And where is the commentary and the critique and the space and the difference and the defiance coming from? Yeah. And of course, the problem with that singular model. So I work in this country, I've done a PhD in this country, I continue to work in this country and train PhD students as I was trained. The problem with that is it can create a profoundly xenophobic system, insular and narrow. And that means the only people, should I say foreigners in inverted commas, the only foreigners that we welcome into our university system, therefore, are full fee-paying international students who have to return to their home country upon the conclusion of their studies. So that means that foreigners are only valued for the money that they bring to a university because of the fees that they pay. Yeah, that's just not good enough. That's xenophobia. Now, we do live in xenophobic times, but as always I say to you, in our universities we must do better, we must be better, we must be greater, we must transcend the mediocrity and the compliance of the culture from which we come. And to do this at our best in universities, we listen to and understand and often implement the ideas, the values, the strategies, the ideologies, the training that exists in other places. So before I talk about internationalisation of the doctorate, which really has been my life's work really, and probably will be the final 10-15 years of my academic career, before we enter that internationalisation of the doctorate matter, and I finally do that session that hundreds, we might even be at thousands of you have requested for me to do on the PhD Viva. I am doing it for you, I promise. Before I got to that conversation, I needed to do some theoretical heavy lifting here and talk about what is, I think, one of the most edgy and interesting concepts that exist in academic life right now, and I think will be bigger, this is a term to watch, in the future, and that is translocalism. If you are interested in how your research can move with integrity, with authenticity, even if you don't move, so even if you stay in one nation in your entire career, how will your research move with integrity and context? And the answer to that is attention to translocalism. Translocalism has an incredible intellectual history, really provocative, really interesting, but it's gained a lot of traction and momentum recently. In the last 2 to 3 years, new publications are really starting to bubble through. And it was originally used, and it still is, by migration historians to explain how migrants understand their spatial movement. So I'll explain how this operates. So a migrant leaves a home, leaves an origin, and moves through space to a destination, to a new home. So translocalism originally enabled scholars to think about how that version of home moves with integrity to a migrant destination. And of course there's linguistic issues, cultural issues, food, all the rest of it, family structures, religion. Really interesting way to think about migration history, powerful. But it's most frequently connected with the amazing anthropologist Clifford Geertz. Wow, big fan. And the concept is so fantastic because it bridges the humanities and the social sciences. So it really exists throughout the entirety of the humanities and social sciences. And can I say, just putting a point out there, I would love our science colleagues to think about translocalism, because at the moment it's almost like, oh, science is science is science. It's decontextualized. It's not situated knowledge. Well, I'm sorry, all knowledge is situated, and particular scientific revelations emerge in particular places. And I'm interested, desperately interested, in the geography of science, the history of science, how particular places create particular innovations. So Ben, hi Ben, when you're writing your book on nanotech and nanoscience and the role of Flinders in that history, think about translocalism, how this place has created your particular paradigm of interest and then how it's moved. Boom. So this term has its origins from the 1980s, and it's gaining, I think, enormously from its revisiting, repurposing and reframing, so that globalization, which is an increasingly problematic word, globalization can twist and agitate and transform a bit, be a bit more complex. So Clifford Geertz recognised the value of the local. And in 1983, he stated, quote, "The shapes of knowledge are always local, indivisible from their instruments and encasements." I hope I live long enough to write a sentence as amazing as that. The shapes of knowledge are always local. Wow, so inspirational. So researching culture as a text, and I'm using that in his terms, as a text, specificity and distinction were recognised and affirmed rather than general principles. So he was a splitter, not a lumper. So he was a singular scholar, and he was critiqued from many, many, many disciplines. Although he was very well housed in anthropology, but his ideas certainly moved radically and quickly. Now, positivists attacked him because of his critique of scientific methods. Marxists attacked him because of his lack of attention to power and resistance, and the postmodernists, always a fickle group, configured his interpretation as simply too literal and too descriptive, so it was lacking interpretive flair and energy. Now, if that many number of people and disciplines disagree with you, you're probably doing something right. As mobility studies grew through the 1990s and particularly the early 2000s, migration started to become much more complex after September 11, Xenophobia 101, and globalisation started to gain increasingly complex definitions, particularly after the GFC, the global financial crisis. So you can see all these things are coming together, and therefore we as scholars, let alone citizens, we as scholars needed a new strategy that recognised distinctiveness and was able to locate specificity, but also allowed us to map and to track the new models of interconnectedness that started to emerge through this new globalisation. So translocalism, in its easiest definition, describes the social and the spatial processes that forms goods, identities, services and ideas as they cross boundaries. So it tracks how mobility transforms our sense of self, place and space. In disciplinary terms, it's obviously been used in anthropology, in geography, in history, in area studies, in development studies, and we also use it in regional development and also in city imaging. Translocalism is aligned with a range of very potent and popular concepts in the world right now. So mobility, connectedness, transfer, flow, big energetic words, and translocalism is part, the engine room, if you will, of those edgy terms. At its most basic, translocalism probes how people, money, and ideas move, while maintaining also the distinctiveness, that distinctive understanding of the location of the origin while they move. So ideas in context and then tracking them as they move. So exciting, brilliant. So it is a way to understand, I think, with both clarity and precision, socio-spatial interactions. Now, Brickell and Datta, what a great couple of scholars they are, describe this as, quote, situatedness during mobility. I'll say that again, situatedness during mobility. I've sat in my lounge suite and I just thought about that amazing phrase for hours. That can be transformative of so many knowledge systems, situatedness during mobility. So this means our narratives, our imaginings of place remain with us as we move. So when I say home, think about that. If I say the word home, think about the images, the sense, the sensations, the sounds that flood your imagination, all those feelings that come when I say home. So you carry that home with you, translocalism. You carry it with you, even though most of us are in a very radically different place from where we were when we think of that home. That home may no longer exist. It might just simply be a place of imagining, often our childhood home. And of course, it is interesting how that imagining travels. How fascinating is this? And of course, that's translocalism. So translocalism both connects and transforms places, and also offers methods to understand our emotional or our affective bonds to particular places. So while the term can be understood theoretically, and it's theoretically terribly exciting, it can also be understood and deployed empirically. Really, really great stuff, particularly to understand international migration and the movement of populations, the movement of food, the movement of goods, the movement of services, particularly between rural and urban environments. So translocalism is great to understand rurality and urbanity and the movements between them. It also is a really profoundly interesting way to understand the media, and it's undercooked in media studies, cultural studies and internet studies, and it shouldn't be, because what it explores is how information and knowledge moves through globalizing networks like the internet. So for example, how have mobile phones transformed our understanding of identity? So we move through space, but a whole series of different locations come to us via our phone. So how do those translocalisms mesh together? Wow, great thesis there, by the way. So wherever you are, we're connected to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. So translocalism is a really interesting concept that allows us to understand speed and what happens with information around us as our bodies move. Wow. Translocalism is also a really powerful and important concept to understand doctoral education. I'm working on a whole project at the moment to think about translocalism and what it is to do a doctorate. For some disciplines, of course, this concept can be the foundation of your entire study. But for the rest of us, I think, translocalism is instructive, because it helps us understand how digitized knowledge moves. Even if we as a scholar, we don't move, how does our research travel And how can it travel more effectively? Yeah. So translocalism challenges our easy binaries of space and place, urban and rural, core and periphery. And it's particularly important in doctoral education, I would argue, because it confronts that notion that one way of doing a PhD in one particular national system is better than others. This is a real problem. The reason why, and you know I'm in favour of doctoral regulation, doctoral governance. You know, I really am in favour of it, because we need to uphold the standards of a PhD so that the PhD can travel around the world and no one ever goes, oh, well, that's not a real PhD. So we need to all understand widely what all these different doctoral systems do. The PhD is taught very differently around the world, but the standard remains the same. So it's important for us that we understand all these different systems, these ways of doing a PhD, and thinking about that and improving our system through learning about the translocal qualifications. Wow. It also, of course, quite wonderfully problematises the nation and the nation state, always a good thing, as the foundational model and system and structures for a way of organising people or money or industry. And it means that we start to understand the local experiences and the local knowledges that transcend the national. So we start to build links with other locals. Let me show you how this works for research. So I'm currently in Adelaide. I'm at the wonderful Flinders University. But Flinders University in Adelaide can have partnerships with Southampton and Southampton Solent. Hi Martin, hi to all of Martin's students. So this is not about the United Kingdom and Australia. This is about Adelaide and Southampton. This is about Flinders and Solent. So that's about two pods of scholars talking with each other. Translocalism. Translocalism, yes, allows us to work with mobility and mobilities, but it also goes beyond the movement of people. It is about the movement of knowledge. Research can move without the migration of researchers. And this means we start to think about new models of co-producing knowledge. Digitisation is really important here. Through digitisation, new ways of co-creating knowledge becomes possible and indeed advantageous, I would argue, particularly as research money for travel declines. And of course, the environmental matter here. Can any of us really, and I mean really, justify all the money and the environmental damage and all the rest of it by going to a conference for 3 days? Can you really justify that as a good use of your time, of taxpayers' money, or indeed the world's resources? And of course it means all sorts of new opportunities become available, like for example digital or online conferences, which I'm a big supporter of through Skype. We can do that stuff easily. Brilliant. Translocalism. Finally, translocalism allows us to critique that easy globalisation. There's so many really bad generalisations, bad knowledge that goes around globalisation. Easy assumptions. You know, globalisation, we all share Facebook, you know, we all share McDonald's, we're all online. This is just a generalisation. It's not true. It's not true. Not everybody is online. There's a very specific sociology of online engagement, rather than just everybody's online, everyone's on Facebook, everyone eats McDonald's. Nonsense. So translocalism asks us to be a little bit more honest and work a bit harder. Translocalism therefore demands more of us as scholars. It demands more of us as citizens to understand local conditions in their texture and in their richness, and to do that heavy lifting that requires us to move ideas, but move ideas with their context intact. Rather than just sort of assuming that we can pluck out a concept or a person or a good or a service, just pluck it out and just move it somewhere else and it's going to operate fine. I think we know that's not the case. It is a time, I think, where we really do this work because digitisation does enable the easy movement of stuff. So translocalism asks us as scholars, as researchers, to, you know what, pause and consider not whether or not the ideas can move, they can, but whether they should move. And I particularly want to make a point here about Indigenous studies and Indigenous methodologies in particular. This concept of translocalism is so empowering and important for Indigenous studies, let alone Indigenous scholars, because it demands that we, the colonisers, the white fellas, really respect what is going on and deeply respect what is going on here. That we respect origins, we respect situated knowledge, where the knowledge comes from, and we understand the context of that knowledge rather than just go, oh, look, that's an interesting concept, let's just put that in a footnote. For me, that's colonisation by other means. Yep. So we don't just simply pluck out an idea or a term or a concept from an Indigenous scholar or an Indigenous context and just move it into a settler society, move it into a colonial discourse, because that's neo-colonial. Therefore, concepts remain encased in their context, and that means they have integrity if and when they travel. Therefore, globalisation is easy. Globalisation is a celebration of movement far too easily, but translocalism is different. It does not celebrate movement, it does not celebrate globalisation, it does not celebrate digitisation. It asks us to track and to develop methods to understand movement, both in terms of its costs and its opportunities. So you'll hear this concept as we play through a series of vlogs. Probably a lot of vlogs that are going to follow will mention this concept. But I thought, look, it's worth just pausing for a moment and playing with the texture of this fascinating concept that has integrity, passion, but also controversy. All the good stuff. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.